During the 1920s, Wall Street became increasingly important as a hub for financial speculation and investment. The stock market boomed during this time, with more and more Americans investing in stock and bonds. Wall Street brokers and traders played a key role in facilitating these transactions and market hubs, these transactions and making huge profits in the process. The wealthy distribution during the 1920s changed significantly with the gap between the rich and the poor widening. The wealth elites, including Wall Street investors, saw their fortune grow expeditiously as stock prices soared and the economy boomed. On the other hand, many workers, many of the working class Americans struggled to make ends meet, and wages staggered and the cost of living increased. Overall, the 1920s was a time of great economic prosperity for the wealthy, fueled by the speculative excess of Wall Street. However, the prosperity was not shared equally among all Americans, leading to growing inequalities and ultimately contributing in the economic crash of 1929. During the 1920s, Wall Street underwent a significant transition in their role and influence in the American economy. The stock market boomed, Wall Street became the center of financial speculation and investments. The growth of the stock market led to an increase in the number of Americans investing in the stock market and bonds, and many seeking to make a quick profit through trading. During the 1920s, Harlem became a major center for African American culture and intellectualism known as the Harlem Renaissance. The neighborhood contributed significantly to society by producing a wealth of art, music, literature, and political activism that helped shape and define American culture. Artists such as Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Duke Ellington emerged from the Harlem during this time, creating work that are still celebrated today. In contrast to the Lower East Side of the New York City during the 1920s was predominantly immigrant neighborhoods, homes to a diverse population of Jews, Italians, Irish, and Eastern European immigrants, while the Lower East Side also had its own vibrant culture scene and history activism. It did not have the same level of national recognition and impact as the Harlem during this time. Overall, the Harlem's contribution to society during the 1920s was characterized by its focus of African American culture and identity, while the Lower East Side contribution was shaped as its status as a melting pot of immigrants in the community. The technologies that emerged from the 1920s and how they changed our way of life was radio. For one, number one, radio during the 1920s saw a widespread adoption of radios as a form of entertainment and communication. Technology allowed people to listen to news, music, and other programs from the comfort of their homes, leading to a new era of mass communication and entertainment. Number two, the automobile. The popularity of the automobile grew rapidly in the 1920s thanks to the advancement in production technologies and the introduction of new models such as the Ford Model T. This allowed people to travel more easily and quickly, changing the way people lived and worked. Number three, movie theaters in the 1920s saw the rise of Hollywood film industry with the development of sound films. The development of sound films revolutionized the way movies were made and experienced. This led to a creation of iconic films and stars that continue to be celebrated to this day. Number four, normal household appliances. In the 1920s, saw introduction of new household appliances such as vacuum cleaners, refrigerators, washing machines, which made daily chores easier and more efficient. This allowed people to spend less time on household tasks and more time on family activities. Overall, the emergence of these new technologies in the 1920s transformed lives and by making communication, transportation, entertainment, and household chores more convenient and accessible. These advancements laid the foundation for the modern world we live in today. In the 1920s, life changed dramatically for women in numerous ways, making a significant shift in social norms and expectations. This era, often referred to as the Roaring Twenties, saw women breaking ways from traditional roles to non traditional, embracing newfound freedoms and opportunities. One of the most notable changes for women in the 1920s was in their increased participation in the workforce. With the aftermath of World War I creating a shortage of male workers, women stepped up and fill the void, taking on jobs in factories, offices, and other industries. The newfound independence allowed women to earn their own income and gain economic autonomy, challenging the long held belief that women's place was solely at home. Alongside their increased presence in the workforce, women in the 1920s also experienced a shift in social attitudes toward marriage and family. This concept, the new woman, emerged, embodying a more modern and independent woman archetype who's prioritize their personal fulfillment and self-expressions over traditional gender roles. This shift was reflected in the rise of the flapper and rebellious and fashion-forward figure who embraced more liberating lifestyles. In addition to their changing roles in the workforce and society in the 1920s, also saw an advancement in their political rights. The passing of the 19th Amendment in 1920 granted women the right to vote, marking a significant milestone in the fight for gender equality. Women began to wield their newfound political power, advancing for issues such as equal pay, reproductive rights, and social freedoms. Overall, the 1920s marked a period of significant change and progress for women as they pushed boundaries, changed social norms, and asserted their independence in their new, exciting ways. The decade laid the foundation for the feminist movement that would continue to gain momentum in the decades to come, shaping the new future for women's rights and opportunities. During the 1920s, radical tension manifested in various ways, particularly in the South, but also in other areas in the countries. Some of the key ways in which this tension manifested was I'm sorry, the Jim Crow laws in the South. Jim Crow laws continued to enforce racial segregation and decriminalization in public facilities, schools, housing, and systems of white supremacy and black subjudication. The Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan experienced in the 1920s, with membership reaching a peak during this decade. The Klan targeted African American immigrants, Catholic, Jews, and other minority groups using violence to intimidate and maintain white supremacy. Racial violence. Lynching and other acts of racial violence against African Americans were still prevalent during the 1920s, particularly in the South. The Red Summer of 1919, in which race riots erupted in numerous cities across the country, underscored the deep seated racial tension of the era. Immigration restrictions. The Immigration Act of 1924, also known as the Johnson-Reed Act, imposed stricter quotas on immigration from certain countries, particularly those of Southern and Eastern Europe as well as Asia. This legislation was provided was motivated by racial and native sentiments with the aim of preventing and preserving racial purity in the United States. The Great Migration of African Americans from rural South centers to the North and Midwestern during the 1920s and 30s also heightened racial tensions. Black communities grew in northern cities. They faced discrimination, segregation, and violence from white residents and authorities. Overall, racial tension continued to be prevalent and destructive force in American society during the 1920s, reflecting deeply prejudice and inequalities that persisted despite the social and cultural changes of the decade. The leisures of the 1920s underwent significant change as a result in the economic prosperity and culture shift of the era. People had more disposable income and more free time, leading to an increase in interest in entertainment and leisure activities. Some people formed the entertainment during the 1920s, including dancing at halls, radios, movies, sports. This emergence of sports heroes like Babe Ruth and Jackie Dickinson captured the public's attention and helped fuel interest in athletics. Overall, the 1920s was a time for cultural, social change, leisure activities, reflected the spirit of the era, with the focus on entertainment, socializing, and new experiences.